Welcome to the Spotlight on Marketing, brought to us by the specialist headhunters in B2B technology marketing space, Armstrong Lloyd. I'm your host, Karen Lloyd, and today's guest is Dani Smallbone. Dani is a transformational force and one of the most trusted fractional CMOs in the technology space. She has a razor-sharp commercial mind and a gift for cutting through the noise. Dani has helped scale companies from scrappy startups to 40 million in annual recurring revenue. Her speciality? Well, turning underperforming marketing teams into agile, insight-driven growth engines. Dani brings both strategic clarity, executional grit that CEOs really crave. So if you've ever wondered what it takes to move beyond the vanity metrics and make your marketing a real revenue driver, this is the episode for you. Welcome, Dani.
Thank you, Karen. What an intro. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, so am I. So, Dani, you've built a career as a fractional CMO, specialising in transformation. Yeah. Can you share what typically sort of indicates a marketing function needs transformation rather than just that incremental improvement?
So it is a really good question. And in lots of cases, marketing functions don't need transformation. They just need to keep doing what they do and get incrementally better rather than transformationally better. But I think the key indicator really is the business getting from its marketing function what it needs, and how far adrift are those two positions really?
What's the trigger for someone to bring you in and use you? Why would somebody get you into their business?
So usually what happens is that the chief exec, the founder, or the investors are looking at the business thinking, why isn't this moving at the speed and in the direction that we want it to? Something's not right. So that's what usually the trigger is. And then when you actually look at a business that does have a marketing issue that needs transformation, the key little telltale signs tend to be that there are no metrics, or the metrics aren't sufficiently well understood, that there's been substantial change in the market and the business hasn't been able to keep up, that the product's underperforming and there are issues there. Quite often, one of the telltale signs is that the marketing function is seen as a service provider rather than as a strategic partner. It's lack of understanding about metrics, fundamental shift in the marketplace in which they're operating, or the way that marketing is respected and treated within an organization as a service provider rather than a strategic partner.
Yeah, I guess sometimes it can just be that emotional piece, really, that the CEO just thinks, I don't believe in what our marketing department's doing, perhaps, or it's that feeling, isn't it, of we're not working as a team, we're not all on the same page, we're working in silos. That's what I often hear why someone brings a fractional in. They feel like there's just a disjoint from the rest of the business.
Yeah, yes, that's true. And sometimes the transformation piece that's needed is purely is about building a stronger GTM relationships and alignment. It can be that. Usually, in my experience, when an organization needs real transformation, it goes beyond that. That is usually a component of it. So actually going in and building a bar-raising, pacey, highly efficient marketing function with good, strong, collaborative GTM relationships is really critical. And everybody working on the same set of metrics, the same goals, that is very important. But it's sometimes more than that. It's sometimes that the market's changed and pivoted, the organization hasn't kept up. So they need to go back and look at their value proposition, their messaging. They need to look at their ICPs and make sure they're actually doing the right things in a way that they can scale. Sometimes it's that the demand gen engine's not functioning. And that could be, your question, how do you know something is right for transformation? Could be that they don't understand what's going on in their funnel. So they're not making the right investment decisions and driving things forwards as quickly as they should be. But there's often a component of that as well.
That's brilliant. Because I know before when we spoke, you mentioned there were 3 spikes to your approach, which was product marketing, brand messaging, and growth demand generation, which you just mentioned. Explain how you determine, so what's your sort of process of deciding which one's the most urgent attention when you first join an organisation?
Of course. So usually what happens is that the chief exec, the founder, the board, or often the person leading marketing within an organization will start having conversations with me about the fact that something's not right, but they're not quite sure what. Sometimes they'll actually have a very, very clear view of what is wrong. So those two things require two slightly different approaches. If they're very clear as to what's wrong, then I will do a diagnostic, but it'll be a much shorter diagnostic, because obviously they're the experts in their business, they're very good at what they do. So you have to work with them as partners in this respect. And if they're very clear what the issue is, then I'll be much more focused on diving into that specific area. So quite often, I worked with an ed tech not long ago where they were very, very clear that the issue was their demand gen engine. So we went in and we looked at all of the metrics for the full funnel and worked out where the biggest gaps were. And then we put our resources and energies into fixing the things that would have the biggest impact within the funnel. In other organizations, the people that I'm working with just know that something's not right. So it's a much bigger diagnostic piece. But again, I'll look at metrics, look at full funnel, do some market research, understand what's changed in the landscape that they're operating, understand who their ICPs are, dig into their product market fit, try and get a really clear understanding of where the opportunities are for them as a business. And sometimes, I've had some customers or clients where I've gone in to help them think about a proposition and how to take what usually sort of at seed stage they've got some market traction, their product is selling, and they can't quite work out how to move it forwards. And sometimes the thing is actually they haven't got a market, they haven't got a product that is scalable. So there's all sorts of different aspects that come into it, but it starts with a diagnosis based on what the client's able to share with you.
And what happens if they don't have a product that's scalable?
Well, a couple of things. Either you help them fix that and you make it so that it is. So this is where some of what I do moves more into business consulting, because marketing cannot be the sole engine of growth. Growth is a team sport. And so you've got to have the right product. You've got to have a marketplace that is able to scale. I worked with a climate tech business. Well, they were very early stage climate tech business, and they thought they had product market fit, but actually they didn't have a market that was going to be able to grow with the product that they had on offer. So actually we pivoted and we created something different, which was able to service a bigger market share, therefore would give them growth.
Excellent. How did you establish that it was that through market research or talking to customers, or were you doing data analysis? How did you find that the market was too small?
We did a combination of things. So we looked at the market size. It was very limited in terms of territory. So whilst it might have met their growth needs over a short period of time, it wasn't a market which for regulation reasons could be expanded into new territories. So there was an automatic barrier there in terms of future growth. And I think in that instance, that was probably the key determining factor, that their overall total addressable market was going to be too small beyond 2 years worth of ambition.
I suppose in some cases, people just have to walk away or pivot, as you said. And in this instance, do you know how well they did with their pivot from now?
Yes. Well, what they've done is been incredibly successful. They've repositioned the product so that they're targeting it at a very, very small number of global customers who have an extraordinarily high ACV. So they have a client list to die for.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So it's just about thinking about where you have to position yourself at and who you can take your offering to that actually wants to buy it and is of value to you as a business in a scalable way.
Great. And how long did it take then to pivot and then get that, to die for client list?
Well, they were trying to run two tracks at one point at the same time. So it wasn't a complete dropping one, spinning up for the other. They did have two running alongside, but it was quick because they're working in one of these markets where the need has come about very, very quickly. And there are very few people able to fulfill that need. So, they certainly got the first one in under 12 months, but to have the client list that they have now probably took them about 24 months.
Okay. So, and that was from almost at seed stage, was that?
Well, these are sort of bootstrappy founders.
Okay.
So they had some clients already there and turnover of, I don't know, $500,000.
No, well, it's a great success story, isn't it? And it's lovely to hear the example of pivoting, because I think there's quite a lot of businesses in this market who are kind of Me Too products potentially, who maybe need to pivot, and a slight pivot could actually change their complete business, couldn't it, into opening into new markets?
Well, yeah, and I've seen that in other areas as well. I worked with an HR tech business. This particular client, they had, it went back to your earlier discussion about how do you work out what's wrong? And usually, in my experience, when it comes to transformation, you're not just trying to do one thing. It's quite complex. There's a number of different things you need to do. So in this particular instance, they had to completely rethink their demand gen approach from scratch, fundamentally rebuild it. But they also had to accept that the product was not highly differentiated in the marketplace, and that the value proposition and messaging wasn't allowing them to clear some space. So we had to build some brand and messaging that allowed them to create a distinct space from the competition. And then the pivot, the main pivot, came actually in thinking about who we were selling it to. So we were positioning it as one sort of product, which was largely how the competitors positioned it. We changed how we positioned it into it was solving a different use case and targeted different buyers within the ecosystem with that different use case. And that is the thing that allowed them to get traction and move forwards. They wouldn't have been able to do that, though, if they hadn't also built out the demand gen function, looked at brand positioning and messaging, and of course, started to build out a really excellent marketing team. You know, you had to bring all of those pieces together.
Yeah, it's like building a house, isn't it? You have to have the framework, but then it's that last little thing at the end that might make something transformational. In this case, it was that ecosystem that you said that built it up. And just a bit more about that then. So how did that ecosystem look? Was it a big campaign? Was it an integrated campaign? You know, what was it? Just messaging, email, social?
Well, this was a fairly early stage organization, so there was not a lot of cash around. And in all of these circumstances, even if you have big budgets, you have to use every penny incredibly efficiently and effectively. So we did it through a combination. We tested lots of different things, but we did it through a combination of paid content and key partner marketing, and then a classic funnel of creating the content to draw the right people in, qualify them on the way through, and bring them to the point of MQL.
And then after that, did you walk away and then everything was just running, or was there anything else you had to do? It feels like you like bake the cake and make it and then walk away, and you feel that you go into the sunset and everything's resolved. But I don't think business is quite as easy as that. So.
No, well, in that case, and in most cases, I usually will augment the team, and that can be hiring the team from scratch, or it can be bringing in new people. In most cases, I will have a mentoring role with whoever the marketing lead is for a period of time, and sometimes also have a mentoring and direct relationship with the CEO or the board member responsible, depending on where they are.
I know that mentoring is one of your passions as well, and you work a lot with both marketing leaders and CEOs. So how do you approach mentoring, and when would you think somebody should consider a mentor?
These are really interesting questions. When should somebody consider a mentor? I think always.
Okay.
You know, marketing, if you're going to be successful in marketing, and I think this probably is the same for CEOs more broadly in business, you know, you've got to be constantly learning. You've got to be constantly evolving. You have to have a learning mindset, and you've got to be curious. So mentoring is a great way to do that. And I, in my own career, regularly get myself a mentor, because nobody knows everything. So I'm a great believer in mentoring as a way to learn and therefore be better at your job and deliver better commercial outcomes. For chief execs, a lot of chief execs, you talked about spikes earlier on. Every chief exec has their own set of spikes. Every founder has their own set of spikes. Not many of them have spikes in marketing, in my experience, or certainly those are the ones I work with. But they're smart people and they have great questions. So they have a good instinct when something's not right. And the best CEOs out there will say, I know this isn't quite right. Now is the time that I want to look at this part of my organization because I can see it's important for my strategic aims. And they want somebody to have conversations with around whether or not their concerns are valid, what might be the possible ways of resolving those, what could be the underlying issues. It tends to be, for CEOs, it tends to be a kind of open space for them to talk about whatever is top of mind and get advice. For marketing leads, it's often similar, but it tends to be more execution focused, depending on where they are in their career. It can be more execution focused about bringing in different approaches to best practice. Slightly more senior marketing leaders, like, for example, CMOs or VPs of marketing, the mentoring there is often about how you start to be able to manage more nimbly the balance of strategy and execution.
In terms of the in mentoring, so just so people understand, because we've got mentoring, we've got coaching, we've got training, we've got different like spikes within that sort of umbrella. How would you say mentoring's different from the others?
That's a very good question too, actually. I think the line between mentoring and coaching probably blurs a bit.
For me, I think that a mentor is somebody that's more of an expert in that field, whereas a coach could be quite neutral. So a coach generally could be somebody who was more on mindset based, whereas a mentor might be more experience based. That's why I'd say is slightly the difference, because you could have career coaches that know nothing about marketing but just need someone to bounce off of and help them with their mindset. Whereas I think a mentor is somebody who's got experience in that sector that they look up to, so they combine that knowledge with mentoring and coaching. That's what I would say, but I don't know if you'd agree with that.
I think what you've said is absolutely brilliant, and it highlights a bias for myself which I didn't know I had, which is I would never want to be coached by somebody who wasn't an expert in the thing I was talking about.
Yeah, I know. I'm the same. Funny enough, the reason I asked the question is because I also have someone that coaches me, but I see them as a coach, not a mentor, funny enough. And right. so I was interested. Oh, should I have a mentor? But yeah, no, that's great. And I know one of the things that you're really passionate about is women in technology as well, mm-hmm. isn't it? So why do you think women are important to mentor, and it's something that, that you're particularly passionate about?
I do mentor men and women. I mentor both, and I get as much pleasure from both. But I do think that I was a young woman in tech, and I would have loved a woman to be able to give me advice and direction on the odd occasion. And most of my career, I was probably the only woman in the room. And I still think we have a much better balance nowadays than we did. And certainly I've worked with some fantastic female founder-led businesses, and I am mostly in C-suite rooms now where the balance is what you would hope, and mostly work with teams where there's a good balance of diversity, full stop. But I still think that there is some work to be done, and that I have a small part to play in that. The whole point of having a diversity mix within your organization is strength of experience and learning. So you need different people who think in different ways. And from a marketing perspective, you need people across the generational mix. You need people across the cultural mix. You need people across the sexes. You need all of those things to get the best results, because a bit like I was saying earlier on about the fact that if you're going to be a really fantastic marketer, you've always got to be curious. You've always got to be learning. This is a sector where there is always more to know than you can know. So that's got to be one of your characteristics and strengths. And I think that also extrapolates out into how people build their teams. I like to mentor, but I like mentoring too, not just from people who've got more experience, but reverse mentoring. There are young men in my teams who know more about a certain thing than I do. Well, I want to learn from them, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how you need to build these things out. It's not about what women bring, what men bring. It's not about what older employees versus younger employees. It's not about British employees versus overseas employees. It's none of that. It's about how you build teams where there is a bit of a niggle, a bit of a constructive difference, and everybody working together to learn from each other and solve the problems for the business in the best way. That's my view.
So from your LinkedIn post recently, you wrote, marketing can't just do marketing. They must operate as a strategic, agile, insightful function. So have you got an example of where you've transformed the traditional marketing team into this kind of strategic growth driver?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are lots of really successful marketing teams out there who do a fantastic job and measure themselves and their success through marketing metrics. So they run a great campaign, they have fantastic engagement rates, etc., etc. But they're not always really truly aligned with commercial outcomes. So campaign engagement's one thing, but actually, what did that do to the pipeline? What did it do to revenue generation for the business? Or what did it do to customer retention and reducing churn? You know, being able to link it all the way through. And I think what I meant by that was you can be great at marketing, but unless you're actually really thinking about what the strategic aims are of the business and making sure that what you're doing is impacting those, then it's fun and it's nice and it's enjoyable, but it's not impactful. So I joined years ago. I spent some time with a med tech and it was great. I mean, it was one of the leading providers around, very, very successful. Marketing function was great at doing all of those marketing metric pieces. But actually, they didn't really understand how all of those things linked into the commercial strategic objectives of the business. So, you know, we went in and we re-looked at all of that and built out an understanding of actually what does this percentage point here at this stage of the funnel mean to, what does this mean in terms of client retention, in terms of churn, in terms of CAC, LTV, all those different things. We completely shifted the way that they thought, which brought them about a 20% revenue increase in that time, just by making small changes in terms of how they thought about things. And then the other thing for that organization was, again, they kind of fully taken the market share that they could within the space they were in. So what's next? So the strategic lens of marketing to look at, okay, so what do we got now? What are we really good at? Where could we take this in terms of new product, new territories? And so, you know, as I say, marketing is a team sport. Growth is a team sport is actually what I meant to say. Growth is a team sport. So with other GTM partners, we looked at, okay, so we've got this. We could build out an AI proposition with what we have. And that won't work in this current territory, but it would work really well in this new territory. And we worked out the GTM strategy and how we needed to do that and took that to market. So it's adding that extra layer. You can be great at marketing, but you've got to be strategic and you've got to be aligned with the rest of the business to really have the commercial impact that marketing should have.
I know that it's a loaded question, this one, but whose responsibility is it to make sure that marketing is integrated in the whole business?
It's the CMO's job.
Yeah.
It's the CMO's job. You know, you've got to be, if everybody else is not, if people don't play nicely, there's going to be a very hard job. But ultimately, one of the CMO's most important jobs is to be a very good diplomat, politician, advocate, champion, an educator. You know, one of your most important relationships, well, it depends, different organizations, different relationships come to the fore. In a lot of SaaS businesses, the sort of the magic trio is the CPO, the CRO, and the CMO. If they can all get on the same page, have the same objectives, OKRs, KPIs, they're all working to the same ultimate set of metrics with their own metrics underneath. That's where you get that shift. And, you know, there's no point product going and building something great if marketing know that there's actually an underlying issue in terms of ICP or messaging or market size. There's no point sales going and progressing all sorts of things if ultimately they don't add to the long-term growth of the business. You know, it's easy to make short-term sales wins, but actually they're not of use in the long term. So all of those three need to work really closely together. And usually that's a relationship building and setting of alignments. But in other organizations, the primary relationships are the CEO and the CFO. Depends how strong the CFO is in an organization. But I think it's a very similar solution, which is about education, explaining investment, return. I mean, the CMO ideally should be blessed with an organization that sees marketing as a strategic growth lever. And if it is, if that mindset's already in place, then the CMO's job is a lot easier in terms of advocating and bringing colleagues on the journey.
Do you think it's possible if you go into an organisation and the CEO hasn't got marketing as a spike and doesn't really believe in marketing, do you think there's anything anyone can do in that organisation to change that? Or do you think it's just a walk away for marketing?
Because I'm a fractional CMO, I will have a slightly different perspective on this. So my perspective is that, and I have been in situations like that, my job is to give the best counsel, advice, and reasoned arguments that I can for a certain strategy. But I must also always hold the overall company strategy and skill sets in mind. And as long as the CMO for an organization, I am giving the best advice I can and advocating and reasoning and arguing that as strongly as possible, ultimately, the CEO is the person who makes the final decisions, and they will always have competing agendas to work against. You know, if you only have so much time and money, you can only do so many things. And if ultimately they think that their best bet is in one area rather than another, then that's where they should put their money. And that's where they should put their time. But my job as a CMO is to always advocate for what I think is best for the business. And I will always come at that from a marketing perspective, of course. Even though I'm a business first CMO, I will always see the role that marketing has to play in that. But ultimately, the CEO makes the judgment call. And whether or not a CMO chooses to exit that organization depends on how bought into the whole plan they are. I mean, I don't think that as a CMO, you have to expect every decision to go your way. Nobody does. But it's a team. It's a team. But if marketing doesn't have a sufficiently strategic view, then I think probably most CMOs would want to look somewhere else, because ultimately you're smart. You're CMO, you're smart. You want to do a good job. You want to make an impact. And if you don't feel that you can, then yes, it's probably right to move on.
Absolutely. And one of our target audiences for this podcast is CEOs who are looking to scale and grow their business and, you know, use the value of marketing. So if a CEO is listening to this and they're thinking, actually, I'm a bit stuck, I don't know where I'm going at the moment, what sort of 3 bits of advice would you give them to consider? I'd
say, firstly, you're on the right track. The first thing you could, if you're questioning if something's not right, then that's the best starting point. You can't fix something if you don't know you haven't got a problem. So congratulations, you're on the right track. The second thing is, have you got a clearer instinct than that? Have you got any evidence to support your instinct? And if so, that might help indicate which area you want to explore more. And if you don't, who can you work with that can help you narrow down where the key issues could be? And that might be somebody internally, might be somebody on your board, or there might be somebody in your CEO network or wider ecosystem who would be able to come and help you with that. But the key things are, look at is your strategy aligned throughout your business? Do your teams have the same set of OKRs to work with? Do you understand how your commercial funnel breaks down step by step all the way to the very beginning? And if you've got any questions around those things, or any of those things don't seem to line up, or your C-suite leaders are not collaborating properly for your benefit, then you've probably got a problem and you want to talk to somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the only thing I'd add to that is also, is everybody in the business aligned with the strategy? You know, does everybody know from the C-suite to bottom, if you asked everyone in the company, what's the goal, what are we doing consistently, not just for a week where you just do it in a town hall, but consistently, is everybody on the same page of what we're doing? Because if not, you're probably running a pretty confused business, aren't you? And I think that's a really first place for a CEO to start with.
Yes, I think you're completely right.
So obviously you're expert at dealing with a variety of different companies. You know, we've already had some examples of early companies and also some experience. So what do you think the different problems are between an early company might have versus something really well established that may be a trigger for needing help?
So usually in the earlier stage organizations, they're really grappling with all of the different components and trying to work out what they need to do. It's usually around product market fit. So trying to work out what they're selling, who they're selling it to, how best to sell it. Are there enough people to sell it to make it commercially viable? And what is their fastest way to get answers to those questions? So it's very pacey, very hacky, try things, change it, switch it up, and usually quite a small team of people. I would usually bring in agencies or freelancers to kind of help with that, to just make it as quick as you can, because you don't want to churn through the money. You've got to get these answers as fast as you can. At the other end of the scale, they've already proven that they've got PMF, they've got a good set of clients, they've probably got multiple ICPs, multiple regions, different product variations. So really what you're doing at that end is building a scalable growth engine with a high degree of complexity involved. So helping them work out how to manage all of those things and put in place, just like at the other end of the scale, put in place metrics and measures so you know when you're being successful, when you're not, so that you can make changes. You still need that huge pace and it's not so much hacky, but you need a lot of pace there. Pace for experimentation and change and growth. So the two, they are different, but they have some underlying things that are the same. They both need a strategy. They both need pace and experimentation, and they both need to be metric driven and ultimately rooted in commercial outcomes.
But just generally, the triggers are different, as you say,
Yeah.
because at the beginning, it's kind of like getting traction, and then probably a more established business is like a bottleneck or a disconnect somewhere, because they've obviously got to a certain point and been successful somewhere to get to that level.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think we're out of time, unless there's anything else we want to discuss at this stage.
No, I've enjoyed talking with you. Thank you. Talking transformation, growth, marketing, digging into things I didn't expect to dig into. It's been really interesting. You've opened my mind to some other thoughts as well, Karen. So I'm grateful for that.
Oh, no, that's great. I think there's been some great messages and things learned, particularly interested about the pivoting and also the advice you can give to a CEO, because I think sometimes it's a lonely place being a CEO in a business, and you feel like you have to. I mean, I run my own business, so I know that it's smaller than other organizations, but, you know, sometimes you feel like you have to be the one that has the answers. And, you know, sometimes you do need to look from outside for help. Thank you so much, Dani. It's been absolutely amazing to learn so much from you today. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Spotlight of Marketing. If you've enjoyed this podcast today, please subscribe, rate and review the podcast. And don't forget to share this with your colleagues, maybe your CEO if you're listening and you think he might or she might benefit from listening to some of the wisdoms that we've spoken today. So until next time, keep shining the spotlight on the power of marketing and driving business growth.